Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast. We're very much Australia focused at the moment because our next live event is in Sydney in Australia on the 9th, 10th and 11th of February 2024. And I had a little bit of an update yesterday about what's going on there, and it is spectacular. I can't reveal many of the things that are happening there, the vehicles that are appearing there, the test drives that we've managed to arrange, like huge amounts, and a massively wide range of vehicles available for test drives and test rides of electric micro-mobility transport, electric bikes, scooters, blah, blah, blah. Brilliant. Just amazing stuff. It's going to be so much bigger than our first event of early this year. So really looking forward to that. And there's an extraordinary story that I've been following from the UK that happened in Australia, which we're discussing today. Two really just great guests, very Aussie. Chris Vanderstock and Kathleen Davies, who both live in Melbourne and in Victoria, in Australia. And up until earlier this year, there was a tax in Australia, in Victoria, specifically Victoria, a tax that meant if you drove your electric vehicle, if you had an electric vehicle and you lived in Victoria, you had to pay 2.5 cents per kilometre a tax to drive it anywhere. Because you're not buying fuel, so you're not paying the fuel duty. We will go into this in detail in this episode, but it is quite an interesting thing because I think it represents the disruptive nature of electric vehicles and electric ground transport, because it does change the normal working practices that we're all used to all around the world. I mean, most fuel is taxed at some point, unless you're in the Arab Emirates, in which case I think if it is, it's so little you wouldn't be able to count it. But there is certainly a lot of costs associated with running a fossil fuel powered ground transport system. Obviously, the fuel being the main one, but also the vast subsidies that governments give to the fossil fuel companies to keep them happy, because they just want more money. However much money they've got, they want more, and they want to make sure they rip that money out of the hands of the poorest people on the planet. I'll just put that flag in the ground there, because that is what is happening around the world. Really brutal industry, really brutal, and requires the maximum crushing criticism from all of us at all times, at all opportunities that we can have. We're all dependent on it. Not living in a fantasy world, we are all dependent on it. But we need to stop being dependent on it with vigor, with venom, with anger. We need to stop using their product as soon as we can. And that is what the background of this story is. So this ridiculous tax on electric vehicles in Victoria, it's just bonkers. You will hear examples of how utterly absurd it was. But anyway, it's not news because it happened a while ago. It was overturned by the High Court in Australia as being it's not legally binding. And so it doesn't exist anymore. And the two of the key people that were involved in that process are Chris and Kathleen, who are today's guests. So it's kind of special. Although it's Australia specific in the nature of the actual story, it is very global, in terms of what governments are going to do in order to maintain the income they get currently from fossil fuels, which is, I don't know about anywhere else, but in the UK, it is majorly substantial. And what do you do to fill that gap in your economic planning? Because if people aren't buying imported toxic fossil fuel from some of the most doubtful regimes on the planet. Not Norway, because Norwegians are lovely. Yes, we know that, and we know we buy oil and gas from them, and that's lovely oil and gas. That's clean, that oil and gas. Anyway, sorry, mustn't go off topic. Fascinating conversation. And if you live in the Southern Hemisphere and can get to Sydney in February, do come along to the show, because it's going to be amazing. And in the meantime, if you're not there and you're not coming to that, then please do subscribe to the Fully Charged Show podcast. Please do subscribe to the Fully Charged Show and Everything Electric Show on YouTube. And tell your mates about it, because we're going places, and we're going places fast. That's enough for me. Please welcome to the Fully Charged Show podcast, Kathleen Davies and Chris Vanderstock. So, Kathleen and Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. This is a really intriguing story. I remember being in Australia last year and knowing about this and having talked to you, Chris, and been in touch with you. And it just sounded like, what on earth is going on? Can you explain? Let's go back to when this ruling happened, which I think was in 2021. We've been talking about dates. From what I can gather, it was introduced in 2021. And it was a 2.5 cents per kilometre tax on electric vehicles. But from what I've judged, I'm just chatting briefly with you, Kathleen, it affected plug-in hybrids as well as pure electric.
Correct.
Right. So it was across the. So that anyway. So I mean, Chris, can you explain that? What the arguments were for bringing it in?
Sure. So Tim Pallas, who is our Victorian treasurer, he premised that people who drive electric vehicles and to some extent plug-in hybrid vehicles don't pay for their fair share of the road. Right. And look, he was arguing obviously a moot point in that fuel excise, which people believe pays for roads in Australia, hasn't really done so since 1959. And more so, it's actually a federally collected tax. So what he was talking about was actually a real furphy. And the revenue that supposedly pays for roads again is it's a Commonwealth tax. And so Victoria was proposing a new tax that it was going to levy on drivers just who are, driving electric vehicles or plug-in hybrid vehicles and trying to do the right thing. So it was extremely frustrating, and I was watching it very closely. And I just couldn't believe that they were basically disincentivizing people to cleaner forms of transportation.
I mean, because what I think we have to explain for people outside Australia and for me, because I don't know how the regulations work there. It just say you live in Queensland and you've got a petrol car. What do you have to pay to drive that on the road? What is there? Are there taxes other than fuel duty? Are there taxes that you have to pay?
Yeah. All motors in Australia pay to the state government a registration fee, and typically in Australia, Victoria, I can speak to Victoria, it's about $750, $850 per year.
Oh, I see. So it's a chunk of money.
It's a chunk. It's a good chunk of money, definitely. And for those who are filling up at their petrol bowser, they're paying, at this moment in time, about 48 cents per litre in fuel excise to the Commonwealth government.
Right. Now, just to help me understand that, because I'm getting confused now. Is there a difference between the Commonwealth government and the federal government? Who's
I'm interchanging terms there. So yeah, the federal and the Commonwealth, same thing.
So the government, the Parliament House in Canberra, that's the seat of the federal / Commonwealth government, right?
Yeah, the executive. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So you're paying that tax. Basically, it's a national tax. You would pay that anywhere. That fuel duty you would pay anywhere in Australia. That's not state specific.
That's right, exactly. So what Victoria was putting here was a new tax that was essentially a levy, an excise, and that the more kilometres you drive, and it doesn't matter where you drive them, it could be outside of Victoria. So the moment you stepped into New South Wales or into South Australia, you were still paying this tax back to Victorian coffers.
Right. So, if you drove, I'm only asking this because I did it. If you drove into Victoria when this ruling was on in an electric car, you presumably didn't. I didn't pay anything. I mean, I hope maybe they'll come and sue me. But
no. So
the car I was in was registered in New South Wales, so it wasn't
exactly right. Yeah, and so you wouldn't be paying for that tax. But if you were Victorian, and let's say you lived in a border town like Albury-Wodonga, and you worked across the border in New South Wales, all the kilometres that you travel into work, say, were actually going back to Victorian coffers.
That's insane. That is crazy, isn't it? And I mean, if you did if you drove over to Perth or up to Brisbane, you would be paying 2.5 cents a mile, and you've got nothing to do with Victoria. You're not on Victorian roads. You're not wearing out Victorian infrastructure. It was a little bit bonkers.
I'll second that.
Kathleen, can you explain, Kathleen? Because I mean, this is the intriguing thing that I think I used it when we were having a conversation before. But if I'd read a story that in a very Republican state, a MAGA state in the United States, where there was a ruling against electric vehicles, it wouldn't be that surprising. It was kind of because it's a petro state nation, it would be less surprising. But in Victoria, it's essentially a sort of left-leaning Labor administration. Am I right? Can you explain who's in
Yeah,
power
that
in
is correct,
Victoria?
Robert. That's correct. And it was when I think back to 2021, and we first heard rumours that the state government would put in a vehicle road user charge for electric vehicles. We thought, oh, you've got to be joking. You must be joking, because the state government was doing things towards zero emissions. They were investing in renewables. They were a bit more progressive. Certainly at that time, we were under a Liberal Commonwealth government who were actively denying climate change to a certain extent. We lived through 10 years of denial and delay, and our Victorian state government were bucking that trend to a certain extent, which was a good thing. But then, of course, this tax came up. People started talking about it. Some of us in the EV network started getting a bit grumpy about it and, signing petitions and making a bit of noise. And, they still put it in. So it was in the wrong direction. It was the wrong direction politically, I think, and it certainly was the wrong direction for climate action. And, luckily, fast forward 2 years and 2 months, and the High Court agreed it was the wrong direction from a constitutional point of view as well.
Yeah. But I mean, it's because what I've been trying to understand is the kind of political reasoning behind it, because there was, it wouldn't have just come out of the ether. They've talked about it. They've decided that there's an unfairness in the system. I'm assuming that people who are driving petrol and diesel cars are paying all this duty, and people who drive EVs, quite often charging them off their own solar panels, particularly in Australia. I mean, I know that. I know many people who will do that. Then they're cheating the system. So there's that kind of, oh, it's not fair. And one of the headlines, the only kind of negative headline I found was it basically implied it's all right for these super elitist rich people who can afford electric cars. They're not paying any tax. It's not fair on the rest of us. Poor, I can't remember the words in Australia.
I'll butt in there. The whole fairness argument I find quite interesting, because is it fair that people are allowed to pollute the atmosphere without any cost? Is it fair that we're allowed to add to the health budget without any repercussion? So fossil fuels are doing a huge damage to our environment, to our health, increasing the health budget, increasing people's illnesses, and the funding for roads, as Chris mentioned before, the federal fuel excise has not been exclusively used for roads since 1959 and hasn't been used at all for roads since 1993. So we've had 3 decades where the federal fuel excise has just gone into consolidated revenue. So anyone who pays any type of tax actually will pay for roads. So you could argue it's not fair on electric vehicle drivers to pay this extra levy when, in fact, we have put up a massive capital cost to buy the car in the first place. I bought my first EV in 2012 with no subsidies, no encouragement, no incentives whatsoever. And I did that because I save money, because I shop at op shops, because I scrimp on other things in my life, and I wanted to put my money where my mouth was. So if you look at my story, I viewed it as a grossly unfair thing that they put it in, because I felt like I was trying to do the right thing. I retrofitted my home from a 2 to a 7 star. I'm doing what I can do to get away from fossil fuels in the home and on the road, and then to be taxed. It's almost like taxing a non-smoker. If you're addicted to cigarettes and you know that you're doing the wrong thing, you're damaging your health, you're damaging other people, do your best to get off that. Save your money and, save your health and save the health of the people around you, and then tax non-smokers. So that's why some people call it the clean air tax, because we are helping create clean air, and yet we're being taxed. So the fairness thing goes both ways. And anyone who pays tax does pay for roads. And Chris has done some excellent YouTube articles about that, explaining, we pay GST on the car, luxury car tax on the car, big GST on the charging of it. I've put in 2 different solar systems now, first one in 2009 and then upgraded this year. That's 20 grand plus back in 2009. So the capital cost is massive. So you could argue that it is actually unfair to put this extra cost on EV drivers who are trying to do the right thing. And that's where I'm coming from. It's,
No, yes. Yes, I agree.
I'd like to add here, if I could add that I've looked very closely year on year at the actual revenue that is generated from fuel excise. And in the last year, that was 21-22 full year, the federal government collected over $12.5 billion just from vehicles in fuel excise. Now, they actually gave back in fuel credits, that is to say money back, to the biggest polluters in Australia to the tune of more than $8 billion, leaving some $4.5 billion for roads. Again, I'll do that inverted comma thing a bit, but it's not really for roads, right? But then in that same financial year, they actually gave to fossil fuel companies, to two refineries, more than $4 billion to keep those oil refineries open. And then there was other subsidies and taxes that the motorists have been paying to keep their cars fueled. And look, I get that Australia needs fuel to keep going, but people have this false belief that fuel excise pays for roads. And my argument is no. We actually, me as a taxpayer, are funding fossil fuel companies to stay in business and to burn stuff and to hurt my health and my families and my neighbours. And we spend billions of dollars on healthcare costs every year. And unfortunately, lots of people have poor health and really bad health outcomes because of people burning stuff. So,
And I mean, all the statistics are now undeniable. I mean, all from all around the world, that if you live near a busy road in an urban area, your health is much, much worse than if you live in a nice middle class area up on a hill where you're not near a busy road. It's not even, there's no argument about it. I mean, we've just had in the last, I think about 7 years ago, the first death certificate where road pollution was the cause of death. So it was of a young girl in London who lived next to a really busy road. And it's heartbreaking. And her mother's become this incredible campaigner for clean air in London. And it's had an effect. It's actually finally, like, you can see the difference, that London doesn't smell as bad as it used to. And there's now 2,500 electric buses on the roads, of red double-decker buses. You wouldn't know if you didn't know about it. They look like double-decker buses we've always had. They're red, but they don't make any noise. And when they stop at the bus stop, they're not going. They're going. That's it. There's a little fan spinning somewhere. But so, I mean, it does make a difference. And I think that is what I'm intrigued about, is that someone argued with and convinced and lobbied the Labour government in Victoria to say this isn't fair, and managed to avoid all the arguments you two guys have just made that are completely and utterly overwhelmingly convincing, but they still decided that this was a good thing to do. And I wonder who they spoke to, who gave them the information that it was unfair, and that hard-working Australian families are being put at a disadvantage by ultra-elitist, tree-hugging, holier-than-thou, virtue-signalling, stupid people who think electric cars are cleaner. We are campaigning in this country against this torrent of misinformation, a large amount of it coming from an Australian-born press baron.
Oh God! Thank you, Mr. Murdoch.
That's where So I think we in this country we blame Australia for all our misfortunes because it's all down to Rupert.
Oh, dearie me! I got to say,
it is intriguing, isn't it? That I just was fascinated by that ruling, because I've got mates in Melbourne who are keen Labour supporters, and who would have voted for that administration, and you just go, well, that is. I haven't talked to them about this particular topic because I'm really intrigued to find out. But what when you were campaigning, were you, Kathleen? Can I ask you, were you getting a kickback of any sort from kind of the equivalent of the Murdoch press, or in the press, or in public opinion? I don't know, anywhere. Were there people who supported the tax?
Yeah, look, when I think back to 2021, when I first heard about it, when it first got past the lower house in the Victorian State Parliament, it was like, come on, you are joking. We've got to do what we can do to stop it passing the upper house. And the Australia Institute had a campaign. The Electric Vehicle Council had a campaign, Stop the Clean Air Tax. Juice Media put out a very good, 3-minute honest government ad, which was a fantastic thing, which I personally took as a bit of a call to arms. And I signed petitions, I wrote letters, I rang politicians, and the feeling that I had, I'm not answering your question because I'm not on social media. I don't know what the Murdoch press was doing. I was just doing what I did in my own little bubble or my own sphere. But I remember having a conversation with my local member, and he's even though I explained my situation where I was coming from, he basically concluded that you just don't want to pay tax. it's a vested interest. Nobody wants to pay tax, and that's where you're coming from. You don't want to pay tax. And it was like, you're missing the point, mate. So at least I spoke to him. There were others that I got emails back from, which was just, thank you for your comment, blah, blah, blah. And most of them I didn't hear anything from. I reckon I could count on 3 fingers how many email responses I had and 1 phone call response. So there wasn't, and then again, as a citizen at the time, I was really struggling with how do citizens actually make change. I was very disillusioned at the time. We were in our 10 years of denial and delay with the federal government, and I was doing a little Shift group at the time. Shift Australia was a volunteer-run organisation that were trying to teach citizens the tools for activism. So use your voice, use your vote, use your dollars, use your time. That was sort of the 4 tools that we as citizens have. And I was doing that, and I was talking to people about that, trying to understand, what do we do? I mean, I vote. I donate money where I can. I choose what I do and don't divest in. I've gone away from the big 4 banks, blah, 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 whatever in my home. And I was just really struggling to work out how do you actually change this, because the political system to me is not working well. And back to your point, I mean, I can't believe that a Labor progressive government would implement this regressive tax. And the only reason I can think it happened, it's all about the cash, Jack. Follow the money. We want money. We need money. So let's put it through, and let's premise it in set up this. It's almost setting up a culture war amongst your own people, which I find offensive, because again, everyone thinks they're not elite or they're not this or they're not that. But God, I mean, I was born up in a coal mining town, right? I was born up in the country. I put myself through uni. I shop at op shops. I've, worked very hard in industry to do what I do. I'm the least status caring person in the world, and to be premised, to be called an elite and all this sort of stuff, it's like I'm coming from a completely different angle. You know what I mean? A completely different place. I'm coming from a place of, if you are serious about climate action, you'll do whatever you can do to decarbonise transport. To me, it's a complete no-brainer. My background's in science engineering. It's not in politics. It's not in activism. I'm just doing this because I've got off fossil fuels as much as I can in the home. Got to get off it on the road. Get off it in the food system. Get off it in industry. Just chunk through this Pareto chart of where the emissions come from and what you need to do. So to answer your question, what pushback we were getting, it really was people will read into it what they want to read into it based on their own biases and where they sit on any spectrum. So, but
also I mean, I think the critical thing here, which is something we've learned in the last few years here, is where their information comes from. So someone will say, at the moment, people are saying, I wouldn't want an electric car because they all catch fire. So, and then you look at that sentence and you go, hang on a minute, what, they all catch fire? Like all of them? Because we've had these 2 incidences where, and you've got to blame the BBC, unfortunately, because, normally you hope that they would be vaguely balanced. A big fire at a car park at an airport, Luton Airport, very damaging fire. Luckily, no one killed or hurt. And immediately it was electric cars catch fire in airport and catch fire. It was a diesel Range Rover that caught fire. And all the electric cars are in the neighbouring car park where there are chargers. And none of them caught fire. But the story still stands. So people will think that was an electric car. The other one was on a boat, a ship that was off the coast of the Netherlands, so quite near here. And a car transporting ship, and that caught fire. It's quite a serious fire out at sea. Again, luckily no one hurt. Instantly, electric cars catch fire. When they actually got put the fire out, got the ship into the dock, unloaded all the cars, they had to lift all the petrol cars off because they were burnt out with a crane, and they drove all the electric cars off that ship. They were undamaged on a different deck. That story does not get in the press. So when you're deluged with Murdoch lies day in, day out, radio, shock jocks, massive flood of negative information about electric vehicles, and then someone goes, I'm not an elitist. I've got my good old petrol car that's lasted 40,000 years, and I can drive 10,000 miles non-stop because I have a bladder the size of an elephant. That's the absurdity of the world we live in. And that's the battle that we have, which is I mean, I think the bottom line is I don't think electric cars are political. They're just technology.
This is Robert. This is the thing. Totally, it does my head in. It really does my head in. I really despair about the future of civilization and humanity with the level of lies and misinformation that's going on. And there's one thing that comes to mind. You might have heard the quote, a lie goes around the world before truth has even had its time to get its boots on, and that really does my head in. And what you said too about, to me, EVs, my background's in science engineering. I look at this as an engineering solution to possibly an engineering-made problem. We are burning fossil fuels, and they have done wonderful for getting a lot of people out of poverty.
Amazing.
Over the last 300 years. It has been an era in our history where we've exploited it as much as we can. We have done a lot of damage in that process. We now know what we're doing, so we now need to change. And to me, it is not. I'm totally the engineers, right? I look at solutions, and I don't see it a problem. I see it as a solution waiting to happen from a science and engineering point of view. But the politics has just made it a complete mess. I still have not forgiven people for politicising electric vehicles or even politicising climate change, because I've looked at it from when I first learnt about it in 2006. I think I had this, naive idea that it's going to bring the world together and we're going to look towards a better future and we're going to transition everything in a very amicable and friendly manner. What a dickhead I was, really, with respect to myself. But it's just, I was naive. And to see what's happened has been heartbreaking as a person, as a mum, as someone who believes that we should be doing whatever we can as stewards of this planet. It is just unacceptable what's happened. And so just to go back to your point about misinformation, one thing that I did feel when the High Court made its decision on the 18th of October, I got interviewed by Sky News twice that day, talking about the Murdoch press. Sky News is a Murdoch beast. They are a bit supportive, mainly because they hate Labor. And even in the Herald Sun, Melbourne's tabloid Murdoch rag, the commentary was quite positive. Not because they love EVs and, whatever, and it's because they hate Labor. So this was a kick up the bum for the state Labor government from their point of view. Yay, stick it up them. We're on your side. Go for the vibe, David versus Goliath.
If I could encapsulate a few things here.
What have you
Chris.
I did quite a few interviews over this last 2 years, and whenever I was facing that fairness and equity sort of questioning around, well, you're not paying for fuel, so you're not paying for roads. Look, when transportation makes almost 20% of our emissions, and we've got the solution that's electric, it's the solution. Well, we should all be doing everything to get there. Yeah. And it was always frustrating that they just kept coming back to this and painting me and fellow EV drivers as being people who can afford a crazy $70,000, $80,000, $100,000 car plus and not paying for their fair share of taxes. And for me, it was never about paying that. I'm happy paying my taxes. I've paid to this tax and still haven't got my refund, more than $1,300. And it really incensed me that I've got an MG ZS EV. So it's a very modest car. It's essentially like a Toyota Camry sort of price, and it's nothing special. It's not a Tesla. And it really got my back up, and I was following this in the prelude, and then when the actual legislation passed, and I got very angry. And some of the comments on my YouTube videos were like, well, you just don't want to pay taxes, do you? And it's like, no, it's not about that. It's such a broken tax. And in the High Court case, a few of the judges noted, and I'm really summarising here, paraphrasing, that basically what this tax has done is it's turned every road in Australia into a toll road. So no matter where you drive, you're paying back to Victoria. And it's a double, triple insult to those who have plug-in hybrid vehicles because they've got a little tiny battery. And they can't demonstrate that, I've actually only driven 40 kilometres today on that battery and the rest has been petrol, of which they pay fuel excise.
Well, they're paying fuel excise,
Yeah, right. And so there was many cases put to the Victorian Ombudsman who hears complaints and puts them to government and, they're passed up and there are actually hopefully some actions that come out of that. And she found many instances of really unfair policies being enacted here by Vic Roads, by the Victorian government, because they had no good legislation in place. They hadn't thought about these issues. And, a lady had driven across the Red Centre, no electricity, barely any any petrol for that matter. And so she rightly put in that, here's my journey, here's where I went, you can see my GPS log. I could not charge that battery yet. You're charging me for, I think it was about 7,000 kilometres for that. Wow. And I should be exempt. And the Victorian government, well, Vic Roads precisely, said, no, you were paying for that. Wow. And that's just one of the many, many issues that this tax had. So to actually do your declaration to say, here's how much I owe the Victorian government, you had to take a photograph, put it into a computer saying, I did this many kilometres. You got the A and the B, and they give you an invoice. But what if you're overseas and you can't take that photograph? So the people who were late, they were getting charged, I think it was like 37 kilometres per day as an overdue fee for kilometres they never travelled. So if you had that beautiful holiday, because we're all holiday now, aren't we? Yeah. No. Because I can afford that.
If you were away working, if you were working outside the country, which I know a lot of Australians do, for the period where you're meant to put in that form, that is grossly unfair.
Very much so.
I suppose you can get your auntie to go to your car, break the window, take a picture of the odometer. What are you going to do? It's just, that's so ridiculous.
And that was one case study. That was one case study. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I was just saying that was one case study where a woman was working overseas. Sorry, Robert, and she paid her rego online and said, "Look, I cannot physically get to my vehicle to take a picture. Can I do it when I get back?" They said no. Yeah. They deregistered her car. So, and that's in the ombudsman's report, and it is beyond comprehension. So, not only in my view, this tax was virtually premised on a lie. Okay, it's virtually a lie that you don't pay your fair share for roads, so you should be taxed. If we want to have a road user charge, be my guest, but it needs to be at a national level. It needs to be consistent amongst all states, and it needs to treat all vehicles the same way. Why do we need to treat EV drivers differently to petrol drivers? I've got a diesel as well as an EV, so I've got one leg on either side, so to speak. My diesel was actually is essentially still being taxed the same amount as what the Vic EV tax was, because I get 5 It's 5 litres per 100 kilometre. It's very efficient. We only use it on long haul trips, so it's actually on a par. So it's not even if the EV tax was heaps cheaper than what a good fuel efficient car can be. So look, not only was it was on a bad premise, it was implemented very poorly. The Ombudsman's report made a comment that there's a lot of lessons in here for policymakers about making policy on the run or no policy at all.
Yeah.
This is the way you don't do a road user charge, Australia. This is the way you don't do it. Get Deborah Glass's report, have a good read, have a weep. I did when I read it. I yelled at the report. It was just appalling. And she actually related it to Robo-debt, which is a very, very bad thing that happened in Australia. To liken this tax to Robo-debt, basically, how do you summarise Robo-debt, Chris? The federal government
I don't know what Robo-debt is.
Said that
they put some numbers into the computer.
Were overpaid and required to give a refund to the government, but they put it into algorithms, and the algorithm said, these people need to send money back. That wasn't money that they had not received. And these are people that were on the bottom of our social barrel to a certain extent, having welfare needs met from the government, and they weren't able to, obviously they didn't have the money, they were harassed by it. Some people even suicided over it. It was that bad, and there's been a royal commission over it. It's just been a terrible, terrible thing to read about it. So for the Vic EV tax to be likened to Robo-debt, it's a very, very ugly thing.
Bad.
Very ugly thing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Chris, can you take me through the sort of steps that went from, you kind of initially complaining about this tax to ending up in the Supreme Court, where you actually,
sure,
the story, because it is quite remarkable.
Yeah, sure. So, I've been, covering electric vehicles and technologies on YouTube for a while, and there was talk about it, I believe, in 2020, and I started covering it because I was just incensed, and there's probably a thumbnail me doing this, like, what, why, and then I watched the actual Senate hearing where they passed it, and senator after senator kept saying that same line about fairness and paying for roads. And I was like, geez, some media persons are giving those key messages to say, haven't they?
Yeah.
So at that time, I said I was done. I wasn't. I really wasn't. Kath and I were already in talks with the lawyers who, I wanted to come at it because I'm a nurse by trade. I'm a dad of 4 kids. Right. And I wanted to come at it from the health perspective and the environment perspective, because that's what I do on my channel, and I talk about the benefits of different technologies that can help us, kind of like what you do, Robert. And so the lawyers were very clever, and they said, well, actually, the way we need to do this and to take it to the High Court is to argue that the tax is essentially an excise tax. It's an inland tax. And think of it like fuel excise, and that's something that is only the Commonwealth government can actually levy, and the state governments in the Constitution don't have that power.
Right.
And so then in September that year, we served the papers to the High Court. I don't really serve the papers. We submitted the papers, it's better said. And then we went public with it. And that was after like a good 6 months of work. And from there, 2 years later, we finally had our hearing on February 14th for 3 days. So that was a great little Valentine's Day gift. And we had oral arguments presented by our barristers. We also had the Commonwealth government. Actually, I'll just put a bit of context around this. The Commonwealth government and Victoria, obviously, as a defendant, but the Commonwealth were actually interveners on our behalf. And that is to say that they were supportive of our case. Yeah. So if you know the term, it's a very legal term. It's essentially that they, in principle, support it and are happy to give up to provide to the High Court oral argument and as to why they believe something is fair and unfair. And so all the other states and territories, after we put our case in, actually became interveners in support of Victoria.
Right.
And this is the thing that many people, I think, at first did not appreciate. And even when the actual verdict was handed down, we were successful. Still, this news did not make international news. Probably should have, because the ramifications are very far and wide. And so New South Wales, Western Australia in particular, they've both got legislation still in place about an electric vehicle road user charge. And it's got either needs to be more than 30% of vehicles will be electric, or year 2027 before it's enacted. But obviously this verdict has squashed that really, but they need to actually overturn that legislation. Nonetheless, all around Australia, from Queensland, Northern Territory, ACT is also a very green sort of group. Tasmania, they all were in support of Victoria, the defendant, of doing this charge, because they too want to be able to do this type of charge. And so, I was coming at it from that health and environment perspective, really incensed by its unfairness, is, just poorly managed. They deregistered cars where they should not have, so on and so forth. And so after 3 days of some very good oral argument and lots of silks in that High Court, oh my gosh, it was a full house. And I'm just looking at the room going, there is so much money in this room.
Yes. The cost per minute would be incalculable. It
was. And the legal fees, just to even get there, you needed support. And we did actually raise some money, more than $50,000 through Chuff to get us to that point. So that was all the...
this was like crowd-funded.
Yep.
Wow, right.
Yes, because obviously the legal fees and stuff like this are quite substantial, and we're all very grateful that people contributed. And when it was all said and done, well, actually, I'll rewind. Going through those proceedings, I don't know about Kath, but it was a roller coaster. A lot of it went over my head, and sometimes you come out of a session, you're like, "That was really bad. That was really bad, right?" Yeah, and the lawyers are like, "Oh no, that was quite good. That was really good." Going, okay, sure, okay, great, onwards and upwards. And so at the end of it, we walked away, and it was basically then in the hands of 7 judges. And I think we can say now, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying this, we felt that we kind of knew where maybe 3 of them were, 2 or 3 of them, and the rest we just didn't know. And all we needed was a majority, 4 out of the 7 judges, to actually side with us. And that's how the verdict actually came out. It was 4 versus 3.
Wow. It must have been amazing. So how long did that take then, that judgment process? Because it wasn't When
long
was it
time.
announced?
It was 6
in
months.
October something. What was it again, Kath?
It was 6 months. It was 6
It
months
took
of
6
deliberation.
months, right?
So we
Wow.
filed the papers in September 2021, and then there was 13 months of written submissions of paperwork flying all over the country between the High Court and all the different states and territories. 13 months, 3 days of a hearing in the High Court in February, as Chris said. Then there was 2 more months of written submissions that the High Court wanted more submissions from the Commonwealth, and then more submissions from Victoria. So there was another 2 months after that, and then there was 6 months of deliberation. And finally, on 18th of October, the D-Day happened, and they dropped the bomb, which surprised some people and didn't surprise other people. So
Right.
I'd like to make a comment about that. The Victorian Treasurer was surprised and upset when that decision came out, and he criticised the High Court and said that the High Court has essentially reimagined the Australian Constitution. And that's a big statement to say that they've reimagined the Constitution. He made it sound as if the Constitution was clear. It's been totally understood since 1891 with the pre-convention debates. It's all fine. But there actually had been an open question for the last 25 years about whether or not a consumption tax could be an excise. So when you look at the High Court's 383-page document reasons for why they said 4-3, they agreed with the plaintiffs, there's a lot of discussion about the potted history of the use of the word excise. It's never had any exact meaning. There has always been divergent views and divergent explanations. There has been inconsistency and confusion about the word excise all the way through the history of this country. So the Constitution, written in 1901, has sort of gone blah, 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 morphed along, hasn't really changed. And the use of the word excise has always been a bit blah, blah, blah. This case has, I believe, in my layperson's understanding, has really tightened up and cleaned up the definition of that word excise about whether a consumption tax can or cannot be an excise. They said, yes, it can, and that was not expected. So by some people. But when you look at a lot of the arguments that happened in the High Court, and again, a lot of them went through one ear and out the other for me.
I bet.
There was a lot of debate. I mean, it took 2 years and 2 months for what I thought on the surface of it. You know, this lev charge is unconstitutional on the basis of Section 92 of the Constitution. That's an excise. Yes or no? Well, the answer is yes, but it still took 2 years and 2 months to get there.
Wow.
So,
no, it is extraordinary. And I mean, it sounds like, though, in some ways, that ruling goes beyond the specific topic of literally how do you fund electric or how do you tax it or whatever else. It's about the Australian Constitution. It's about the strain between state rule and federal rule. I mean, I'm assuming a lot here, but I mean, there seems to be that.
Totally. It has highlighted, in my layperson's opinion, it has picked the scab off the wound that is federal or Commonwealth versus state relations. I don't feel that the Commonwealth and the state relations have been very good forever, and there's always tension between states and between states and the Commonwealth government. This case has really highlighted that big time. And there has been some analysis in the media after this case, not only about tax policy and road user charges and all the rest of the stuff, but about the Constitution. We are governed by a horse and buggy document in Australia. It hasn't really been changed since 1891 before it came into effect. So since 1901, it's really just sat there as an archaic document from colonial times, and therefore there's a lot of things in it that, you know, possibly is going to pop up again in future and be another constitutional, you know, High Court issue. So my question to the universe is, what do we do about it? We've just recently had a referendum in Australia to try and change the Constitution to acknowledge First Nations people as our First Nations people. That was voted down. So unfortunately in this country we need to have a referendum in order to change our Constitution, which means the majority of people in Australia to vote for something and the majority of states, which is a double positive to even make a change. So it's no wonder it hasn't really changed in the last, 200 and whatever years. So that's another issue in my mind that's come up with this. So it's raised a lot of issues without a doubt. But at least we know a consumption tax can be an excise now.
Can be excise tax. But I mean, I think also it's relevant to other countries around the world, because it is, one of the things I've always said. I've always said two things about electric cars. One, they won't save the world, but they're better than the stuff we use now. They're not the panacea, the ultimate answer. There's so many other aspects of our energy consumption of fossil fuels as well. But there's that. But also they disrupt. They are a disruptive technology in the same way that cell phones were to landline phones and computers were to typewriters. They're different. You can't, you can't compare. They kind of do stuff. They bash things out of place that have been in place all our lives that are normal. And suddenly they go, oh, hang on a minute, that doesn't work anymore because of this. I mean, fuel tax is the big one in this country, because we pay staggering amounts of excise duty on fuel. I can't even remember what it is, but it's the majority of the cost of buying a litre of petroleum in this country is taxed by a vast margin. I mean, it would be.
And where does that money go,
No
Robert?
one would
Just
drive
out
an
of
electric
interest?
car if they didn't tax fuel. So it would be so cheap. So, but then I've talked to transport ministers here in the past about what you're going to do in the long term, when the majority of vehicles on the road are electrically powered, and you power them off any electricity that comes from anywhere. Can you tax the electricity? I mean, they already do. There is some tax in our electricity bills at home, 5% VAT. So you do kind of pay a tax on electricity. But I can make my own electricity, not as much as you can, but I can do it, and I have done it, and I've driven literally probably close to hundreds of thousands of miles using solar only, nothing else at all in the last 10 years, not in the last, it's much harder to do here because you can only do it in the summer. But that, what do you do as a government that needs to raise funds from things? I mean, we do need to maintain roads.
There is a flip side here, and I like arguing this point in that, as I talked about before, we pay a lot of money to fossil fuel companies in direct funding and also in subsidies and unrealised revenue. And Australia is very good at that. We've got a great record of actually letting all the fossil fuel companies, and I'll just talk briefly now for like gas, let's say, most of them are actually foreign nationals, and they don't pay any tax in Australia, and they earn billions of dollars, and they pay for nothing in Australia. So let's have the conversation about fair tax, right? And look, if we could get petrol, diesel out of our equation and go purely electric and electrify everything, which I thoroughly support 100%, I'd argue we actually don't need a tax to pay for roads, because all the taxes we have now pay for roads, say. So if you're a pedestrian and you actually walk to the station, you get public transport, you still pay for roads. And about 90% of funding for roads actually comes from local councils for our rates. Right. So me as a homeowner here, I pay $2,000 per year in rates to my local council. So part of that's bin, part of that's, my whatever levy. But there's also a good majority of that's actually to pay for that road out there.
Maintenance of roads,
So I think people just need to look at the big picture.
Yeah, and I mean, also in Australia, I mean, the argument that is completely overwhelming for everything from a purely economic standpoint, particularly in Australia, is you can make all your own fuel in your own country, employing people in Australia to run and maintain that system, as opposed to sending money, literally sending money from your economy out of your economy to other, quite often less than benign, regimes around the world, to buy fuel that you bring into the country. You spend huge amounts of money and tax and energy refining that bloody fuel. You put it in your bloody tank and you bloody burn it once.
Exactly.
Robert,
no recycling.
There's no argument that can defend that. There's no economic argument. It is insane to do that. We do that here too, and it's we send billions of pounds a year out of our economy.
100%. We're the lucky country, Robert. We're not the clever country. Lucky country, lucky country, not clever country.
I may have to share that with my missus.
I like that one.
It's unreal. It is unreal. So I'll second everything you said, and it just does my head in. It really does do my head in.
I mean, it's a huge challenge for this country to produce enough electricity with renewables because of the population and the size of land we have. It's a real challenge. And the offshore wind industry is amazing, and we have done incredible. On the windy days now, we're up in the high 60% of all our electricity is coming from wind, which is unimaginable. And that's happened in 10 years. It's unbelievable. So, and when it's 60%, we're not buying gas from Norway or Qatar. We're not buying gas from Putin. We're not, we're reducing the amount of gas we're burning, and all our electricity is coming from wind and nuclear. And those days are going to increase, the number of those days. Well, that's been a massive challenge for a small, damp, dark island off the coast of Europe. Whereas I've driven across Australia. It's quite big. You've got so much room for solar, and you are doing it. I mean, it's happening.
We're a continent.
In an amazing way
in
Australia.
Continent.
Yeah. But I mean, there are such amazingly good stories coming out of Australia. And I mean, I think I actually would add this to that, the fact that this legislation it's incredibly good news. And, I hope there's now slightly more electric vehicles in Victoria than there was.
Yeah, there's been a good improvement. Like year on year, we've had a more than, you could say 100% improvement, but we're laggards really worldwide. We're going to probably hit about 8% this year, a bit over. And but prior to when the tax was introduced, it's around about 3.5%. And one of the arguments that we put forward here is that this is a real disincentive for people to go electric.
Yes,
and
cool.
It was identified by the Australian Institute that 7 out of 10 would probably not buy an electric vehicle if they had to pay a tax like this. Yeah. And so everything that this tax was for, and supposedly paying fair share, and I think Tim Pallas at one stage said that, we'll install electric vehicle charges with it. All the money just went to central revenue. Right. Yeah, and the Victorian government, when asked under a Freedom of Information request by a fellow Australian journalist from Tech AU, Jason, I think his name is, it was discovered that, Vic Rose doesn't know how much money was raised. They don't know where the money actually went to. And that's why they're taking so long for these refunds, because they need to identify people somehow. They should know how, because I can give them my receipts as to how much I paid. It's not that hard.
They took the money from you. So, because this is one bit I think we should add to the whole story. So, basically, the ruling was overturned. You no longer have to pay an EV tax, 2.5 cents a kilometre. But also, within that same ruling that said the government should give all those people their money back? How did that come about?
That was definitely not what we asked the High Court. We just said, was this two questions? Is this actually fair? Is this under the Constitution? And who's going to pay costs? So I was really surprised when Tim Pallas on Outside of Government in Victoria said that, look, we'll look to whether or not we have to do refunds, because as my understanding was, they didn't have to, potentially. Oh. It's very unclear. So it was a real surprise that a bit over a month later they go, actually, we will give you refunds.
So it's like, so bizarre. Yes. I mean, it's great, but it's because brilliant. If they fought against that and then they suddenly went, okay, well, we've been ruled against, well, let's give them the money back. I've never heard of any government anywhere in the world giving money back.
With interest. It's
with interest.
Yes.
But first we have to find out who those people are and how much we owe them. That's what he said. It's like, come on, that's so embarrassing to say that. I'm embarrassed on his behalf to say that.
Yes, because, I mean, I would think they had extremely good, efficient records of getting the money, i.e. they've got some data. They've got a bit of data in that area. We lost that. I mean, our government, it's extraordinary. Some really skilled politicians in this country managed to lose their WhatsApp messages. I mean, no one else loses them, but they managed to, and it's a mystery how that happened. No one understands. I don't know if you heard, one of our politicians dropped her phone into the North Sea.
Wow.
I mean, you're always doing that the toilet I've done. Not the North. The North Sea is pretty extreme. Anyway, but so eventually, hopefully, you'll get your money back. But I mean,
early
what I'm intrigued.
They said.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh, good. Oh, there'll be parties in Melbourne.
Anyway, I've already donated part of mine to a local climate action group that I'm involved with in the eastern suburbs here. So part of mine's already been donated, and I think the other two parts of it will go to the Australia Institute and Climate Council. So even though I'm getting a refund, I'm sort of viewing it as it's not really mine. This is all, from my point of view, I'm going to use it for a donation that I usually donate to them every year anyway, but this will be the source of this. So,
but I mean, it is. I'd not thought about this before because I didn't understand the kind of the details of it. But it is really intriguing, Kathleen, because I mean, normally I've now moved on to being mildly critical of plug-in hybrids. I mean, I think it's fine you've got one, and it's better than not having one, and all the rest of it. But I saw it as a kind of transitionary technology, and let's not even discuss that. But this tax was brutally unfair to people with plug-in hybrids. I mean, it was unfair to EVs, but like, for pity's sake, so you're buying petrol and you're paying an extra tax. I mean, that is outrageous. And I don't know what the sales figures for hybrids and plug-in hybrids in Queensland were, but they're in Victoria, but it's probably quite high. They were very popular vehicles. I've seen lots of them on the roads in Australia. It wasn't like they're rare vehicles. They're quite commonly used. So the people who had those really were stung. That's just
and look, just on that point, just to defend my decision making on that point, Robert, I totally 100% agree with you with that. What the BMW i3 that we bought that in 2017 after having a Nissan Leaf for 5 years with an i3. That's right. So it's not so much of a plug-in hybrid thing.
No, I didn't know that's what it was.
It is driven on electric, but we do have the range extender. So when we bought the Nissan Leaf in 2012, that was 100% battery electric vehicle.
Yeah.
Loved it. I would still have the Leaf if it had have gone more range. We had it for 5 years. And I know we talk about range anxiety, and we always thought it was not a true thing until we got it. But, as you know, bladder range is more important than battery range, 100%. Yeah. But in 2017, when my husband changed jobs, we changed driving habits, the only car that was on the market in Australia was the BMW i3 Rex or a Tesla. Couldn't afford a Tesla, and we had a different plug type to what we had with the Nissan Leaf because we've got a charger on the wall in the garage. So it was the i3. That's the only reason we bought it. I would not buy it again.
No, but
it is a plug-in hybrid, but we were sort of stuck with it at that time of our life. And I sort of don't want to lose it now because it's the High Court car.
You mustn't. You've got to hang on to it.
I'm going to keep it for at least 10 years.
Yeah, let me just then put an addendum in the notes, a subclause, in that I'm slightly critical of plug-in hybrids when they are like 3.5-ton SUVs that can do 12 miles on the battery. But the BMW i3 is one of the legendary, including the Rex, legendary game-changing electric vehicles. It's amazing. I didn't realize that's what you had.
It is a very cute car. It is a very cute car.
You're very lucky. I love it. You've got to keep that. That is a classic. In 100 years' time, that vehicle will be worth $10 million.
I hope so. It'd be nice not to have appreciation on a car.
Yeah.
But so that's where we're in. But
it's also heartbreaking that they've stopped making them because they're just amazing.
Of course they stopped making it after we got ours. And the worst thing is that as soon as we bought ours, they changed the bloody plug type in Australia. So we've got the redundant plug type, and so we can't use any public charging stations without an adapter. But BMW doesn't recommend adapters, blah, blah, blah. So it's very much just the home city car for 200 Ks around town. That's it. What we're doing at the moment, my husband did lease a Tesla. So we are down on the Surf Coast. At the moment, it's sitting with, I think, 60% battery at the moment, 60% charge. We're going to Warrnambool in 2 days. And it's like, where do we go? We have to start thinking about public charging. What do we do? What do we do? And we haven't had that experience yet because the i3 has been the home and the diesel has been the long haul car for, family holidays or when I work.
Yeah, my wife and I drove 5,500 kilometres around Australia, including Victoria, in the early part of this year, and we were in a Polestar, and it was easy as poo. Yeah, it was no problem.
That's nice. See, I still haven't. I'm still a nervous traveller when it comes to charging, only because I haven't done it much.
Yes, so as soon as you do it, it becomes is it's just normal. It's just boring.
Exactly. It's nothing. The charging infrastructure on the coast of Australia, particularly the East Coast, is great. It's pretty good, well covered. It's very good. Yeah, it's definitely.
It's the most lovely thing.
Chris, I tell you, Surf Coast is pretty crappy.
But we're used to. We're used to damp, when the early charging infrastructure in this country was always in a puddle at the back of the toilets around the back of the town hall where no one ever went in the dark at night, and you'd have to find this bloody thing, and then it didn't work. And I stopped in little towns in Victoria, I don't even know where they were, little little sweet towns, and there was a nice cafe, and over the road there was this brand new, beautiful, spotless, well-lit, lovely charger that worked, and we'd put reverse in and plug it in, and it went ping. I went, oh my goodness, that works. And we'd go and have a cup of coffee in the nice cafe, and there'd be birds singing, and it was sunny, and I've never been happier in my life. Using new chargers in Australia is a joy, believe me. Anyway, look, we must round up because I've had such fun talking to you guys. It's been brilliant. But what I'm intrigued by what I don't know if you've thought about this, but what will happen, because it's inevitably going to happen. This transition is global. It is on such a scale now. This is a thing I've become very aware of, and really in the last couple of years. There's lots and lots of issues and problems that the world's going to have to deal with. China being a really major one, that all the newest, cheapest, best cars are coming out of China. And what do we do about that what's our relationship with China? That's a hugely complicated other topic. But the transition to electric ground transport is going to happen. It's not like will it catch on, or I don't know about range anxiety. All those things are just going to disappear, and people will just have electric cars because that's what's on the market. Second-hand ones are going to be the big change. That's the big change we're seeing happening here now. Is the second-hand market is growing so huge because of company leased cars. So there's hundreds of thousands of electric cars that companies have leased for their staff, and they're being sold onto the second-hand market. It's changing the whole picture. The prices are coming down, and people can afford a second-hand car, and they know that they're reliable now. All those boring arguments. But what will happen, I suppose, there is a just say there that you switch off all the fuel duty that is generated in Australia now. That income to the federal government is quite substantial. And that goes away because people are charging their cars at home off the solar panels or off the community-owned wind farm or whatever they're doing. How do we ever? Because you're arguing, Chris, I think we don't even need any form of taxation on ground transport if we're not funding the fossil fuel industry.
Exactly, and that's an important key point there.
Yeah.
And look, unrealized revenues. We're talking in the almost $35 billion was the last figure, I believe, as Australian Institute found, and that's more than 3 times what fuel excise actually generates. So we can stop having that conversation, I think, and I think look to other things that we should be doing, and encouraging, incentivizing. We're still very much about more than twice behind the nearest next nation is about running a 20% EV adoption rate. In Australia, we're not even at 8%. So the conversation, sure, maybe downstream, maybe in 5 years, 10 years. But on this street out here, there's only 2 households who have electric vehicles. And I'm waiting for that magical transition point where the neighbor and the Bob and whoever has their electric vehicle, and they realize, it's not going to catch on fire. I can actually drive up to Sydney and back. And they just realized that all the FUD that's occurred to this moment in time was actually untrue. Shock horror. And people actually jump into electric vehicles because, I shout it from the rooftops on my channel. I talk about it at work. People at work know that I'm that guy, and they're like, just be quiet, Chris, please, enough.
Yes.
and it's really hard convincing people. And I've read recently that, car auctions in the UK, that some of the higher end vehicles just are not selling now, and the cheap ones are, because people know full well that the resale value of fossil fuel cars, petrol and diesel cars, is actually going to bucket out. It's going to fall to bits. And everyone's buying electric second-hand vehicles. So you're mad. I'm telling people now that the transition in Australia will happen fast. We've already seen that doubling this last year. We're going on the swoosh. We get the exponential growth. Yeah. And in 3-5 years, you're going to struggle to on-sell your petrol or diesel car.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not going to be a policymaker, I think. If I am, I'll be Minister for Health. Thank you very much.
Yes. That's fantastic. Kathleen, is there anything you'd like? I mean, I'm trying to keep us to under an hour. I'm going to fail because we're just about to go over. But I mean, have you got any other, what your future plans are and what you think might? Is there? Can we end on a high note?
I don't have any crystal balls. Sadly, I don't have any crystal balls. But look, I guess what I would like to see now that this case is closed, Your Honour, I would like to see the decarbonisation of the transport system speeded up. We know we've got to decarbonise. Let's just get on with it. We've only known for a long, long time that we need to decarbonise. So that is now ready to go. If we do want to have the conversation about road funding, sure, let's have the conversation. But keep in mind that comes with holistic tax reform. And what Chris has said about the fossil fuel subsidies is a massive opportunity to save money. And I don't have stats in front of me, but if we look at the big multinationals in Australia with tax avoidance and tax loopholes, just stop hitting the little man, please. Let's do the big fish first, close the loopholes on the big fish and stop killing the little man. What worries me is that we do have a middle class squeeze. So the middle class in Australia is being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. We're being taxed, income tax, every other tax, GST tax, giving it to welfare, but it's trickle-up economics, and that seems to be the model we have. It's not trickle-down, it's trickle-up. So we do have, I think, some systemic issues with tax and systemic issues with the economy. I'm not an expert in any way, but there's a lot of opportunity to do a hell of a lot better than what we're doing. So let's just get on with it, and let's keep the politics out of it as much as we can, and let's base our decisions and our beliefs on empirical evidence. That's the science and the engineering person in me. I can't help it. Where does the data show you need to go? And it does worry me, the misinformation and all the things you mentioned before. That really worries me. And, I'm not going to go on my soapbox now, but we've just got to...
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please do, Chris.
Yeah. I wanted to say that, Kath's point about the holistic reform, Australia is one of the very few countries in the world where we still do not yet have an internal combustion engine car ban. We have no emission policy.
Oh, emissions.
We've got these.
That is amazing.
It is, right? It's embarrassing.
Country. Oh.
Well, it's Australia and Russia. It's when you see those two things. What are the two countries that have no emissions controls? Australia and Russia. And you go, oh yeah, okay, and Russia. It's not the best country to be arm in arm with as you march towards a fossil fuel powered future. It's slightly embarrassing.
Yeah, we're a rich nation in every way. Yeah, we're a rich nation in every way, and we've got the resources, we've got the people, we've got the smarts, we've got the technology, yet we fail on such a basic level. And we can address this one part of the equation, that 20%. We're on our way. We really are.
Yeah. It's been a more joy than I should have talking with you. I always like talking to Australians who get on soapboxes. But your soapbox was very, very well intentioned and successful. That's what's amazing is if this story was we went to the High Court and we tried to do this and we lost, would be really depressing. You went there, you took a very powerful government body to court and you won, which is amazing. So I mean, big congratulations for doing that. And it has resonated, and it should resonate around the world. It is because we're going to go through these painful changes in the next 10 years or so. And at least we've got a success story that we can.
That's true. It does feel like the David versus Goliath.
Exactly.
Congratulations to you. I know there were a lot of other people involved, but I know that you were very key to it. So it is really.
I'm planning on buying a copy of the actual, the judgment and framing it because I've got a little picture of our legal team here. It's our legal team.
Oh, look at that. Oh, wow. Wow, that's amazing. Wow. That's quite a lot of people, isn't it? Wow.
It is. It is. So, yes, very, very grateful for those clever people. Very, I salute them.
Very good arguments. Very, very good arguments. I'm not a constitutional law expert, but I've learnt a little bit, and it's I think it was a clever strategy. Not everyone agrees with that, of course, but it obviously won 4-3, and, the 4-3 is still a win. If Collingwood win the grand final by 1 point, you don't say it wasn't a win. 4-3 is a win, mate. And it's cleaned up. Mate. It's cleaned up. Can a consumption tax be an excise in this case? Yes, it can. And move on.
Yeah, very good. Guys, it's been brilliant talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a real joy, and I'll hopefully see you soon.
Yeah, I'll see you in Sydney.
Really hope you enjoyed that. We're not going to talk about anything else. There's going to be more episodes coming soon. Another one from Australia, I know, which is really interesting, about vehicle fires. That's going to be fascinating. And some about electric vehicle insurance we're going to be recording soon. And if you have been, thank you for listening. It'd be terrible if I forgot that bit.